was 19 years old. I had a backpack with 3 changes of clothes, and I had exactly $40 left in my pocket. When I signed the paper that would change my life forever, everyone in that county clerk's office thought I had lost my mind. The old man selling it to me could barely hide the small smile working at the corner of his mouth, like he felt sorry for me, like he felt a little relieved too. The station had been sitting there for 14 years. Empty. Nobody wanted it. The roof had collapsed in 3 places. Trees were growing right up through the holes, reaching for the sky, like the building was trying to breathe out something green from inside its own bones. And now a girl who hadn't slept properly in a week was handing over the last $40 she had in this world. For a railway station, the rest of the country had forgotten existed. I understood how it looked. I didn't care, because down on the rusted tracks, half swallowed by the Carolina marsh grass, sat a locomotive the size of a house. And I didn't know it yet, standing there in that golden low country afternoon. But everything I had ever lost was waiting for me inside that station. My mother, my father, the truth about who I really was, and the man who had spent 12 years making sure I would never find any of it. The wind off the salt marsh smelled like iron and old rain. I remember that part. I remember everything about that night. The way the cabin floor of the Carolina Rose felt cold through the soles of my boots. The way the brass throttle lever caught the last of the porch light from the station house. The way my own breath came out shallow and quick, like I was about to do something dangerous, except I wasn't doing anything. I was just standing there. Tomorrow we opened the doors. Tomorrow the whole town would walk back into a building they had spent 14 years pretending didn't exist. And I was 19 years old, and I had no business being the one to make that happen. Except I was. So I was. I put my palm flat against the cold steel of the boiler housing the way my father used to do. The way he used to greet her. The Rose. That's what the crews always called her. The Carolina Rose. Big as a house. Patient as a woman who has waited too long for somebody to come home. I closed my eyes. And in the dark behind my eyelids, the whole story came rushing back at me. All of it, from the beginning. Let me start there. My name is Eleanor Calloway, and the first thing you should know is that my father died when I was 5 years old. I don't have many memories of him. Just 3. 3 small, bright pieces that I have carried around inside me for the last 14 years, like beach glass in a coat pocket, worn smooth from being touched. The first piece is the smell of his hands, engine oil, that particular dark, sweet smell that gets into a man's skin and never quite washes out. He would come home from the rail yard, and I would run to him and bury my face in his shirt, and there it was. that smell, warm and metallic and alive. The second piece is his face when he heard a train whistle in the distance. We lived close enough to the line that you could hear it. Late afternoons mostly. That long, mournful note coming across the marshes from somewhere out by the river, and whenever it happened. Whenever that sound rolled in from the distance, my father would stop whatever he was doing, wherever he was, mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-anything, and he would close his eyes, just for a second, the way some people close their eyes when they hear a piece of music they love and don't want to let go of. I asked my mother once why he did that. She said it was because he was listening to who was driving. She said every engineer pulled the cord a little different. She said my father could tell who was working that run just by the rhythm of the whistle and the way he tilted his head when he listened. Like a doctor with a stethoscope on a chest. Like he was hearing things the rest of us couldn't. The third piece is the last time he hugged me. He came into my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and he told me that one day he was going to show me something special, something only he could show me. He said it like a promise. He said it the way grown-ups say things when they know they have time, plenty of time, all the time in the world. He didn't have time. 3 weeks later, he was gone. I won't tell you about the funeral. I don't remember it well. What I remember is the silence afterward. How a house can hold the shape of a person for years after they leave it. How my mother would walk past his coat still hanging on the hook by the back door. How she would stop, touch the sleeve, walk on. For 3 years, it was just the two of us, Adeline and Eleanor, mother and daughter. We made our own world inside that small house at the edge of Wadebridge. A world that smelled like the lemon polish she used on the kitchen table. A world where she sang to the radio while she ironed. A world where I was the most important person in every room she walked into. Where she looked at me, really looked at me, the way mothers look at the children they grew inside themselves. Those 3 years were ours. And then she met Vernon Pickett. I was 8 years old when he came through our front door for the first time, carrying a bouquet of carnations he had bought at the gas station on Route 17, the cellophane still on them, a price sticker still stuck to the green tissue paper. I should have known right then. A man who can't even take the price sticker off the flowers he's giving your mother is not a man who is going to take care of either of you. But I was 8. Nobody asks an 8-year-old. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I remember that. I remember thinking, even at 8, even with my whole limited 8-year-old vocabulary, that his smile lived only in the lower half of his face, that from the cheeks up. He was watching us, calculating, weighing. My mother thought she had found a second chance. She had been alone for 3 years. She was 36. She worked double shifts at the county hospital as a billing clerk. She came home tired, and here was a man with a steady job at the county tax assessor's office and a house already paid for and no children of his own. Here was a man who said all the right words at the right times, who held her chair out at restaurants, who fixed the leak under our kitchen sink without being asked. She thought he was kindness wearing a face she could love. She married him when I was 9, and the day she put on that pale blue dress and stood in front of the justice of the peace and said yes, that was the day I lost my mother for the second time. Not to death, not yet. That was still 7 years away. I lost her to a version of herself I did not recognize, a quieter version, a version that learned to read a room before she spoke, a version that watched Vernon's face for permission before she laughed at her own jokes. We moved into his house, the big one out on the old county road, 2 stories, white paint, black shutters, a magnolia tree in the front yard older than any of us. And from the very first week, Vernon Pickett began the long, careful work of erasing me. He never hit me. Understand that. He never raised his voice. He never called me a single bad name. If you had asked the neighbors, if you had asked the women at his church, they would have told you that Vernon was a fine stepfather, a patient man, a man who had taken in a child who was not his own, a man who had done a Christian thing. But Vernon Pickett knew exactly what he was doing. When I walked into a room, he walked out. Not fast, not dramatic, just drifted out, as if he had remembered something he needed to do in the garage. When I spoke at the dinner table, he kept talking like I had not made a sound. He would ask my mother to pass the salt right over the top of whatever sentence I was in the middle of, and my mother, the new, quieter version of my mother, would pass the salt. When relatives came to visit, he introduced me as the daughter of his late wife. Not the daughter of his wife, the daughter of his late wife, which meant nothing, which meant something, which meant that I belonged to a woman who was already partially dead in his telling, a woman who used to be Adeline Calloway, who used to have a husband named Wendell, who used to live somewhere else, who used to be a different person before Vernon graciously rescued her. I was the leftover, the piece of furniture from the previous house that nobody had quite figured out how to throw away. By the time I was 11, I had my own shelf in the refrigerator with a label on it, my name written in his small, careful handwriting on a strip of masking tape, Eleanor, as if otherwise we might confuse my food with the food of real people. By the time I was 12, the good bathroom upstairs was off limits to me. I used the small half bath off the back porch, where the faucet dripped no matter how hard you cranked it. I learned to brush my teeth listening to that drip. By the time I was 13, I slept in what had been a storage room at the end of the hallway. He had cleared most of it out, pushed the boxes against one wall, set up a folding cot, bought me a small lamp from a thrift store. He had been generous. He told my mother he had been generous. And my mother, the new version, had nodded and said yes. He had been very generous. There was a box. I want to tell you about the box now, because the box matters. The box matters more than I knew at the time. It was a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. Cedar, maybe. Plain. Not pretty. Not ugly. Just a box. It had a small latch on the front. Tarnished brass. And it sat against the wall in the upstairs hallway, right outside my so-called bedroom door. For 7 years. It was my mother's box. He had moved it out of their bedroom shortly after the wedding. He had told her there wasn't room. He had told her it could live in the hallway for now. Just for now. Until they figured out where it should go. That was when I was 9. The box never moved again. It just sat there, year after year. I walked past it every morning to brush my teeth, every night to go to sleep. I knew the way the light from the hallway window hit the lid in the afternoons. I knew the small, dark stain in the wood where someone had spilled coffee on it once. I knew it the way you know a piece of geography, the way you know the curve of a road you have driven 1,000 times. I never opened it, because Vernon had told me once, just once, in a calm voice, like he was telling me the time, that the contents of that box were not for me, that they were my mother's private things, that if he ever found me in there would be consequences. He didn't say what the consequences were. He didn't have to. I asked my mother once what was in it. She looked at the box for a long moment. Then she looked at me and she said, "Soon," she said, "when you're older, we'll go through it together. Just you and me." That was the only time she said anything that sounded like the old Adeline. Soon, when you're older, we'll go through it together. She got sick when I was 15. It was fast. It was the kind of sickness that comes in like a thief and takes everything before you can even name what it took. By the time I was 16, she was gone. In her last weeks, she would hold my hand and she would look at me the way she used to look at me. Before Vernon, before the quiet version. The full, unfiltered Adeline rose up to the surface of her eyes in those last weeks, and she would squeeze my fingers, and she would try to say things, and mostly she could not get the words out, but her eyes were saying them. "I'm sorry. I left you alone in there. I am leaving you alone in there." I tried to tell her it was all right, that I understood, that I had been all right, that I would be all right. I lied to my dying mother, and I would do it again. She squeezed my hand one last time on a Tuesday afternoon, and then she was gone. And Vernon looked at me across her hospital bed for the first time in years. Really looked at me, and his eyes were doing math. I knew that look. I had seen it before. He was figuring out how long he had to keep me before he could stop. He didn't throw me out. That would have been a kindness almost, a clear, definite line. A door slammed. He let me stay. But he made the rules so clear that staying felt like punishment every single hour. He stopped buying my food entirely. He left my shelf, with my name still on the masking tape. He just stopped putting things on it. I bought my own groceries. With money I earned bagging at the Piggly Wiggly after school, hiding cans of soup behind the cereal in his pantry because he had told me my groceries were not allowed in the main pantry. He turned the heat off in my storage room bedroom that first winter without my mother. The vent had been closed for years anyway. But that winter, he closed off the doorway too. Hung a heavy plastic sheet over it. He told me, with a small, calm smile, that it was to save on the heating bill. I slept in 2 sweaters and a wool hat. I worked all the time. The Piggly Wiggly first, then a hair salon downtown. The owner was a woman named Maybelle, who let me come in at 5 in the morning to sweep up and wash the towels before she opened. She paid me cash. She fed me biscuits. She did not ask any questions. I think she could tell. I think Maybelle could just tell. I saved every dollar I could. I kept it all in an envelope under the thin mattress on my folding cot. I didn't trust the bank. I didn't trust anyone with a name and an address Vernon could find. By the time I was 19, I had $260. That was my whole world. $260 in an envelope under a mattress in a storage room. And a wooden box outside my door that I had never been allowed to open. The flyer changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon at the end of March. The light in the Low Country that time of year is something I don't know how to explain to people who haven't seen it. It comes in low and gold across the marshes, like the whole world has been dipped in syrup. The Spanish moss on the live oaks turns silver. The cordgrass turns to fire. I was walking home from Maybelle's. My feet hurt. My back hurt. I had been on the floor scrubbing under the wash sinks since 5. It was almost 6. I was thinking about whether I had enough left in the pantry for soup, or whether I needed to stop at the gas station for crackers. That's when I saw it. It was stapled to the wooden telephone pole on the corner of Spruill Street and Magnolia, 2 blocks from Vernon's house. A telephone pole I had walked past every single day for 10 years. Going to school, going to work, going home, going nowhere. The flyer was cheap copy paper, already curling at the edges from the humidity. The handwriting was slow, deliberate. The handwriting of a man who is not in any hurry, who has all the time in the world. It said, Historic Railway Station. Deed included. $40. Serious inquiries only. Call the number below. I stood in front of that telephone pole for a long time, a railway station, for $40. It was obviously a scam, or a prank, or some kind of mistake, or a property with such a catastrophic problem hidden inside it that nobody in their right mind would touch it for any price. I took a picture of it with my phone. I kept walking. That night, I could not sleep. I lay on the cot in the storage room with the plastic sheet hanging in the doorway, and I held my phone above my face in the dark, and I looked at that picture, and I looked at it, and I looked at it, because something was happening in my chest that I did not have words for. My father had told my mother once, a long time ago, before I was born even, that the best opportunities in this world are the ones everybody else has already walked past. That value lives exactly where nobody else is looking. My mother had told me that once, in passing, years ago, when I was small, when she was still the full Adeline, and here was a piece of paper on a telephone pole I walked past every day that nobody else had called about for a month. I waited until morning. Then I called. The voice that answered was old, a little hoarse, with that particular timbre of a man who has spent his life outdoors, who has drunk a lot of coffee in cold weather, who has yelled across train yards. He said his name was Hollis. He said the flyer had been up for almost a month. He said I was the first person who had called. I told him I was 19 years old. I told him I had $40. I told him I wanted to come and see it. He was quiet for a long second. Then he said, "Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. He said, "Wear shoes you don't mind getting muddy." And he gave me directions. Saturday morning at 7:30, I walked out of Vernon's house with my backpack and the address written on a piece of paper torn from a grocery list. Vernon was on the front porch with a cup of coffee. He watched me cross the yard. He did not say anything. He hadn't said anything to me in 11 days. I was keeping count by then. 11 days of complete silence. Like I was a ghost moving through the rooms of his house. I walked the first 3 miles to the bus stop. Then I rode the county bus south, out toward the river, toward the marshes, toward whatever was waiting at the end of a dirt road I had never been down. The dirt road came off Highway 17 and ran east, through a tunnel of live oaks, Spanish moss hanging down so low in places that it brushed the top of the bus sign. The road went on for almost a mile, and then it bent, and the world opened up, and there it was. Hollis Brennan was waiting at the gate. He was in his late 70s, not tall, but holding himself straight in a way that made him seem taller. His hands were enormous, calloused. The hands of a man who has worked outside his entire life. He wore a white short-sleeved shirt, dark trousers. Despite the warmth of the morning, A canvas hat that had been washed so many times it had lost any trace of its original color. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm and brief. He did not smile, but his eyes did something. They moved over my face for a half second, like he was looking for something specific, like he was checking for a resemblance. I didn't know what he was looking for then. I would later. He said, "Walk with me." We walked. The driveway into the station was almost a quarter-mile long. The live oaks closed in over our heads. The light came down in green and gold patches. Somewhere off in the distance, I could hear the slow sound of water moving in a tidal creek, and a marsh hen calling, and the wind in the cordgrass. Then the road bent again, and the trees opened up, and the station was there. It was bigger than I had imagined, much bigger. The main building was 2 stories, dark red brick that had been weathered in patches by 14 years of Carolina sun and salt air, so that the wall closest to the marsh was almost black in places, and the wall facing inland still showed the original red. Iron archways above the platform entrance. Beautiful, even ruined. The original ironwork still showing its scrollwork under the rust. The roof had collapsed in 3 places, and through those openings, trees had grown up. Live oak saplings, a young red cedar in one of them, so that the building looked half held up by brick and half held up by whatever the marsh had decided to grow inside it. The wisteria had taken over the south wall almost completely, and on that March morning, it was just beginning to bloom. Long purple clusters hanging against the dark brick, like somebody had painted them there on purpose. And out in front of all of it, on the rusted tracks the cordgrass and the smilax had nearly swallowed. The locomotive. I had seen it from the road as we came around the bend, but getting closer was different. The thing was huge, even leaning slightly, even rusted, even covered in trumpet vine and resurrection fern. It dominated the space the way mountains dominate. 3 passenger cars stretched out behind it, their wooden siding silvered by years, their windows long empty. Spanish moss hanging from the window frames in long gray curtains that swayed in the salt breeze. Between the second and third car, a young red cedar had grown up between the rails, its branches spreading over both cars, as if the tree had decided to hold them together. I stood there for a long time. Hollis didn't rush me. He just stood beside me, with his hat in his hand, looking at the locomotive, and his face was doing something I couldn't read. After a while he said, "Look around as much as you want." We walked through the main entrance. The double doors were long gone, the opening framed by wisteria growing over the top of the arch like a curtain. Inside, the waiting room was vast. The original pressed metal ceiling still intact in the sections where the roof had held. its pattern barely visible under decades of grime and water staining. The floor was the original wide plank heart pine, dark, dense, holding on in the places where the rain had not reached. Light came through the empty window frames and through the holes in the roof, in dense gold columns full of dust and floating seed. So thick they looked solid, like you could touch them. The original ticket windows were still there on the north wall, the iron grills intact, the painted lettering above them faded but legible. The waiting benches were gone, but the iron mounting hardware was still bolted to the floor, rows of it running down the center of the room, like the ghost of an order that was no longer there. I walked through it all in silence, and I felt something I still have trouble describing. It wasn't despair, it wasn't panic. It was closer to recognition, like finding a place you had dreamed about. Without knowing, it was real. When I came back to where Hollis was standing near the entrance, I asked him a question that had been in my chest for a week. I said, "Why $40? He was quiet for a long second. Then he said, "Because 40 makes it a sale, not a gift." I looked at him. He said, "I don't want to give it away. I want whoever ends up with this place to have chosen it." I said, "I have more than 40. He shook his head. He said, "The price is 40. I said, "I could pay 60. I could pay 100. I have $260 saved. I could give you most of it." "You're an old man. The roof is gone in 3 places. There's a tree growing through it." He almost smiled. He said, "The price is 40, and I want to know that whoever signs the papers has thought about it and has chosen it. Anyway." I asked him if anyone else had been to see it. He said, "You're the first person who has called. The flyer's been up almost a month." I asked him why. He said, "People in this county have a hard time with this place. Not because they think it's haunted, because they think it reminds them of something they would rather not remember." I asked what that was. He looked out the open window frame, toward the locomotive on the tracks, and his face did the thing again. "The thing I couldn't read," he said. "A time when small towns out here had a future." I thought about my $260 under the mattress in Vernon's storage room. I thought about how, if I gave him 40, I would have 220 left, which was nothing, and was also everything. It was every single thing I owned in the world. I thought about my father, closing his eyes when he heard a train whistle. I said, "I want to buy it." Hollis looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they are confirming something they decided a long time before this conversation. We signed the papers on a Monday afternoon at the county clerk's office. The clerk looked at me with an expression I knew well, a mix of pity and curiosity. Then she looked at Hollis with a silent question. Whether the old man was in his right mind,
Hollis signed without changing his face. I signed with my hand shaking.
When the deed was filed, I held the copy in my hand and I looked at my own name on it, Eleanor Calloway, and below it, the legal description of 17 acres of low country, including a station building, 3 passenger cars, 1 locomotive, and the rights to a 60-foot easement out to the county road. Mine. Whatever that meant. It meant I had to go back to Vernon's house one more time. I rode the county bus back into Wadebridge, the deed in my backpack, $40 lighter, $220 in an envelope still under the mattress. I walked the last 3 blocks slowly. I knew it was the last time. Vernon was in the front room watching the news. He didn't turn his head when I came in. I went to the storage room. I packed 3 changes of clothes into the backpack. I took the envelope out from under the mattress, and then I walked into the hallway, and I stopped in front of the wooden box. It had sat there for 7 years. I lifted it. Vernon's voice came from the front room. Not raised, not angry, just calm. He said, "Put it back." I said nothing. He said, "That box is not yours." I said, "It was my mother's." He said,
"And she is dead, and anything she left is mine. Put it back, Eleanor." He used my name. For the first time in years, he used it like a man placing a goose on a chessboard.
I walked toward the front door with the box under my arm. He stood up. He came into the hallway. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders. He had 30 years on me and 40 pounds. He stood between me and the door. He said, "Set the box down and walk out empty-handed, or set the box down and don't walk out at all." My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I looked at him. I had been looking at him for 10 years, and I had never let him see me looking. I had kept my eyes on the floor, on the wall, on the coffee mug, on anything but his face. I looked at him now. I said, "I bought a railway station today." He blinked. Just once, surprised, caught off balance. I said, "With my own money. My name is on the deed. It is mine," I said. "I will never set foot in this house again. After tonight," I said, "I am taking what was hers, and I am leaving. And if you put one hand on me, Vernon, I will scream in this hallway loud enough that the Hendersons next door will hear it, and the Cushmans across the street will hear it. And by Sunday morning, the whole congregation at First Baptist will know that Vernon Pickett tried to put his hands on his stepdaughter the night she walked out of his house." He stared at me. I had never spoken that many words to him in my life. I had never spoken to him at all. He stepped aside, slowly, just enough for me to pass. I walked through the doorway, and I felt something inside my chest let go. like a hand that had been clenched for 10 years had finally opened. I walked 2 miles back to the bus stop, the backpack on my shoulders, the wooden box under my arm, the envelope of $220 in my back pocket, and I rode the last bus south to the dirt road, and I walked the 1/4 mile in the dark, past the live oaks, past the Spanish moss, to the station, to my station. I sat down in the middle of the empty waiting room, the pressed tin ceiling above me, the gold columns of moonlight coming through the holes, the smell of marsh and wisteria and old wood, and I opened the box. There were photographs, a few. I couldn't see them well in the dark. There was a small bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. There was a thin enamel locket I half remembered from my mother's neck, and there was a pocket watch, heavy, old, brass, the chain wrapped twice around it. I held it up to the moonlight. There was an engraving on the back. I had to turn the watch slowly to catch enough light to read it. 1991. W. I sat there in the dark. W.C. It took me a moment. It took me a minute. It took me longer than it should have. Because I was tired. Because the day had been 100 years long. Because my own mind didn't want to put the pieces together.
W.C. Wendell Calloway, my father. This watch had been my father's. My mother had kept it. For 14 years she had kept it. In a wooden box in a hallway. In the house of a man who hated everything she had been before him. I held the watch in both hands. I started to cry. Not loud. Not big. Just steady. Like something draining out of me. And then I noticed something else. Tucked into the inside lid of the box. Folded into a tight, small square. A piece of paper. I unfolded it.
It was a sketch, a pencil sketch, of a building, a 2-story brick building with iron archways above a platform, with a clock face above the entrance, with smoke coming from a smokestack on the south side of the roof, with a single locomotive sitting on the tracks in front of it. It was the station. This station, drawn from memory by somebody who knew it well. And along the bottom of the page, in handwriting I knew, in the curling, certain handwriting of my mother, Adeline Calloway, there were 5 words. The home we'll come back to. I sat there with the sketch in one hand and the pocket watch in the other, and I understood. Not all of it, not yet, but some of it. This was not a coincidence. The flyer on the telephone pole, the $40, the old man with the hat, the first phone call. None of it was a coincidence. My mother had known about this place. My father had known about this place. And somebody, somewhere, had spent a very long time waiting for me to find my way back to it. I lay down on the heart pine floor that night, with the box as a pillow, listening to the marsh breathing through the empty windows, the frogs, the night herons, the slow movement of water in the tidal creek 100 yards behind the building, the wind moving through the live oaks, and then, around 3 in the morning, far off, almost too far to be sure, so far that I sat up in the dark and held my breath to be certain. I heard it, a train whistle, long, low, mournful, coming across the marshes from somewhere down the line that had been closed for 14 years, the line that had no trains, the line that had no rails worth running on for 40 miles in either direction. I walked out onto the platform, barefoot, the wood warm from the day, the Spanish moss moving in the dark. There was nothing out there. Of course, there was nothing out there. I stood on the platform in the dark, and I listened, and I waited, and the whistle did not come again. But for the first time in my life, standing in an abandoned railway station in the middle of a salt marsh in the dark, with a backpack and a wooden box and $220 to my name, I was not afraid. I was home, or I was as close to home as I had ever been. I went back inside. I lay down on the floor. I closed my hand around the pocket watch. W. C. Wendell Calloway. And I slept. I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the platform. For a second, I didn't know where I was. The light coming through the empty window frames was different from any light I had ever woken up in. Gold, soft, filled with floating dust and pollen and the slow rising hum of cicadas. The pressed tin ceiling above me caught it and sent it back down in patterns I had never seen before. Then I remembered. The station. Mine. I sat up. The pocket watch was still in my hand. My fingers were cramped from holding it all night. The wooden box was beside me, the little folded sketch tucked back inside. The footsteps were coming around the corner of the building, slow, heavy, familiar. Hollis appeared in the doorway with a paper grocery sack under one arm. He stopped when he saw me. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the box on the floor next to me, and then back at me. He didn't say anything. He set the sack down on the floor near the doorway. He walked back out onto the platform. He sat down on the edge of it, with his back to me, and he waited. I understood. He was giving me time. I got up. I splashed water on my face from the canteen I had filled at the gas station the day before. I walked out onto the platform. The morning was already warm. The Spanish moss was moving in a small, steady breeze. The locomotive was 20 feet away. Massive, patient. lit gold by the sun coming up over the marsh behind her. I sat down beside Hollis. He had brought coffee in a thermos. He poured 2 tin cups full. He handed me one without looking at me. We drank. After a while, he said, "You stayed." I said, "I stayed," he said. "Some folks would have gone back." I said, "I'm not going back." He nodded. Just once. The way he nodded yesterday at the courthouse, like he was confirming something he had decided a long time ago. I said, "I have something I need to ask you," he said. "All right," I said. "Did you know my mother?" It just came out of my mouth like that, flat, direct, no preamble. Hollis did not turn his head. He did not change his expression. He just looked at the locomotive on the rails, and he held his tin cup in both hands, and he did not answer. The silence went on for a long time, long enough that the cicadas seemed to get louder, long enough that I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Finally, he said, "I think we have a lot to talk about." "Eleanor." He said my name. He had not said my name yet, not once, not at the courthouse, not on the phone, not yesterday morning. He had said it now, and there was something in the way he said it that made my chest go tight. He said, "But not yet. Not today." I started to push. I started to ask, "Why not today? Why not now? What do you know?" He held up one of those big, calloused hands. He said, "Some things have to be found, not handed." He said, "I will tell you everything you want to know. Eventually. But not yet. You haven't had time to be in this place, and this place has things to tell you. Before I do." I stared at him. He stared at the locomotive. I had known him for 2 days, and I trusted him in a way I could not explain. I said, "All right, that was the end of it, for now." The first week, I just lived there. I could not do much else. I had $220. I had a backpack. I had a building with no running water and no electricity and no roof in 3 places. I had to figure out the simplest things first, like where to sleep that wasn't the floor, where to wash, where to keep food without it spoiling. Hollis came every morning. He never came empty-handed. The first day, it was the grocery sack: coffee, cornmeal, dried beans, canned tomatoes, a box of soda crackers. He set it down on the floor and said, "This is not charity. Think of it as a deposit on whatever this place is going to become." The second day, he brought a small 2-burner camp stove and a pot. He set them on the floor next to the grocery sack. He said, "The man who used to run the rail yard had this in his garage. He's been dead 12 years. His wife was glad to be rid of it." The third day, he brought a hand pump, a real one, with a long iron handle. He carried it over his shoulder like a man half his age. He said, There is an old shallow well at the back of the property. The pump on it gave out a long time ago. This one will fit the casing. Get me a wrench." I did not have a wrench. He had brought a wrench. Of course he had. By the end of that first week, I had cold, clean well water coming out of an iron pump at the back of the building. I had a camp stove I could cook on. I had a small section of the old station master's office cleared out with my folding mattress on the floor. The roof was intact in that one room. The window still had glass in it. It was almost a bedroom. I called it that, my bedroom. For the first time in 10 years, Hollis introduced me to the others slowly, like a man who knew the right speed for everything, who knew that introducing too many people to a young woman who has just escaped from the wrong house would be its own kind of harm. The first one he brought was Lyman Hammond. Lyman was 60, tall, quiet. He drove a brown pickup truck so old the paint had faded to the color of pluff mud. He was a master mason, brick and stone. He had restored historic buildings up and down the coast for 40 years. He had a way of walking up to a wall, putting his palm flat against it, and standing there for a long minute, like he was listening to the wall, like the wall was telling him things. He came on the 8th day. He looked at the south wall where the wisteria had eaten the brick. He looked at the chimney where the mortar was failing. He looked at the iron archway over the platform entrance. He looked at the tree that had grown up through the center of the eastern roof section. Then he turned to me. He said, "Miss, I heard about this place from a friend at my church. I'm here because I want to be, not because I expect to be paid. I have my own tools in the truck. I will start tomorrow, and I will not stop until you tell me to stop, or until I am dead, whichever comes first." He said it without smiling. I almost laughed and almost cried at the same time. I said, "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet." He started the next morning. The second one was Josephine Vance. Josephine was 68, a retired school teacher, small, sharp-eyed. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and she walked with a small limp from a hip surgery she would tell anyone about whether they asked or not. She came up the driveway in a green station wagon that was older than I was, carrying a cardboard box. She came on the 11th day. She set the box down on the platform and she opened it, and she said, "My grandmother kept these for 50 years. I don't know why. She never told me why. They sat in her cedar chest until she died, and then they sat in mine, until I read in the paper that somebody bought this station. And then I knew why she kept them. The box was full of photographs. Photographs of the station when it was running, the waiting room full of people, women in hats, children clutching small leather suitcases, Men in railroad uniforms standing on the platform with their watches out. The locomotive, newer, brighter, with the words Coastal Carolina Railway painted along the side in gold lettering. There was one photograph that stopped me cold. A man and a woman sitting on a bench on the platform. Maybe 19, maybe 20. The woman was laughing at something the man had just said. He was looking at her sideways, with a small, private smile, like he had said the thing on purpose just to make her laugh. The woman was my mother. The man was the man in the locket, Adeline and Wendell. Long before I was born, long before any of it, I asked Josephine where her grandmother had gotten this picture. Josephine said, "My grandmother sold tickets at this station from 1983 until they closed. She knew everybody who came through here. She took pictures of them sometimes, with a little camera she kept under the counter. She said the trains carried people's stories, and somebody had to keep them." I held the photograph in both hands. Josephine said, "Honey, your hands are shaking." I said, "That's my mother." She did not say anything. She just put one small, dry hand over mine and held it there. Then she said, "Then I think we just found out why my grandmother kept this box." Hazel Marsh came on the 14th day. She came alone, in a small, white sedan. She was 82. Her hair was completely silver, and she wore it short. She had on a blue cotton blouse and gray trousers. She walked up to the platform slowly, carefully, the way an older woman walks who has decided exactly how many steps she has left and is not going to waste any of them. She stopped at the edge of the platform. She looked at me for a long time. She said, "You have her eyes." I did not know what to say. She said, "I'm sorry. That was a lot to open with." She took a breath. She said, "My name is Hazel Marsh. My husband Earl was the station master here for 22 years. He died in 2015. I knew your mother when she was young, before she met your father, before any of it." She looked at me again. She said, "I knew her, and I loved her, and I have been wondering for a long time when I would get to meet you." I asked her in. We sat in what passed for the kitchen, the camp stove, 2 folding chairs Lyman had brought from his truck, a small folding table. Hazel looked around at everything, and she did not say anything. She did not say it was sad. She did not say it was beautiful. She did not say I was brave. She did not say I was foolish. She just sat and looked and drank the cup of weak coffee I made her on the camp stove. After a while she said, "Your mother used to come out here." I said, "To the station." She said, "Yes, before it closed, with your father. They used to walk the platform together at sunset, after his shift ended. They were just 2 young people. Then, they had nothing yet. Not even each other. Not really. Not officially, she said. Earl and I would see them from the office window, standing out there at the end of the platform, looking out at the marsh, not even talking sometimes. Just standing, she said. I thought about both of them often. Over the years, I said, did you know? I had to stop. I had to start over. I said, did you know what happened to my father? Hazel set her cup down very carefully. She said, I knew. We all knew. Everybody in this county knew. She did not say more. I did not push. I was learning already that this place, these people, they moved at their own speed. They told what they were going to tell, when they were going to tell it. Before she left, she said, I have something at my house that belonged to your mother, that she gave me to keep a long time ago. She said, I have been keeping it for 10 years. She gave it to me before she married Vernon. She said, if anything ever happens to me, don't let him have this. Hold it until my daughter comes for it. She said, I am 82 years old. I have been waiting for 10 years to know whether I should go and find you or whether you would find me. She looked at me steady. She said, you found me. She got into her small white sedan. She drove away. I sat on the platform for an hour after she was gone, trying to breathe. Hold it until my daughter comes for it. Until my daughter comes for it. My mother, the quiet version, the one who passed Vernon the salt over the top of my sentences, the one who never said my name in his presence if she could avoid it, the one I thought had gone away, had not gone all the way away. She had been planning in some small private chamber of herself that he could not reach. She had been planning to come back for me. Eventually, somehow, I went down to the basement that night. I had not been down there yet. I had known there was a basement. There was a heavy wooden trapdoor in the floor of the station master's office. I had been moving a wooden crate out of the way that morning to clean under it. And there it had been, the hinges old and stiff, the wood swollen with humidity. I had pulled it open and looked down into the dark, and I had decided that whatever was down there could wait until evening, until I had a real flashlight. Hollis had brought me a real flashlight that afternoon, without my asking, like he knew. Of course he knew. I went down the wooden stairs slowly, the flashlight beam ahead of me. The basement was surprisingly dry. There was a small ventilation slot near the floor on the outside wall. The air moved through it gently. There were wooden shelves along 3 walls, holding wooden crates and canvas mailbags, most of them rotted. In the center of the space, there was a roll-top desk. a wooden chair, a kerosene lamp with a cracked chimney, and on the desk, a metal box with a tarnished brass latch. The latch was corroded, but not locked. I opened it. Inside there were folded papers, some of them brittle at the edges, letters in envelopes with the postage stamps yellowed and partially fused to the paper. Photographs printed on that matte paper from another era. I picked up the first photograph carefully. It had been taken on the platform of this very station. I could see the iron archway in the background. 2 young men in railroad uniforms standing in front of the locomotive, both smiling at the camera. The one on the left was thin, dark hair combed back, holding his head tilted slightly to one side, in a way that did something to my chest before I could even name what it was. I turned the photograph over in faded blue ink. Hollis and Wendell, 1997. I sat down on the bottom step of the wooden stairs because my legs would not hold me. Wendell, my father, in a uniform, standing in front of this locomotive, standing next to Hollis Brennan, 2 young men, friends, co-workers, brothers maybe, the kind of brothers life sometimes hands you. Hollis Brennan had not just sold me this station. Hollis Brennan had known my father. I sat in that basement for I don't know how long, the flashlight on the floor next to me, the metal box open on my lap, the photograph of 2 smiling young men in the dim circle of light. When I came back up the stairs and out onto the platform, the sun was going down. The gold light of the low-country evening was turning the marsh to copper. The Spanish moss was moving in the salt breeze. The tidal creek behind the station was catching the last of the light in long, slow flashes. Hollis was sitting on the edge of the platform, where he always sat, with his canvas hat in his lap. He had not gone home that day. He had been waiting. I walked over to him, the photograph in my hand. I sat down next to him. I put the photograph between us on the warm boards of the platform. He looked down at it. He did not pick it up at first. He just looked. After a long time, he said, 1997. I said, yes, he said. We took that on a Tuesday. I remember. There had been thunderstorms that morning, cleared off by lunch. Your father said we should get a picture. Said his wife wanted one for the house. Said he never had any pictures of himself at work. I waited. He said, he was 28 years old in that picture. He said, I was 48, he said. He had been with the railway 6 years by then. He had come to me when he was 22, knew nothing, wanted to learn everything. I watched him become an engineer from the ground up. He was the best I ever worked with. I am not saying that because of you or because of him. I am saying that because it is the truth. He picked up the photograph He looked at it for a long time. He said, "I have known who you were, Eleanor, since the first time you called me."
I said, "I figured that out about an hour ago." He nodded. He said, "I owe you a lot of words." I said, "Yes." He said, "Will you let me say them?" I said, "Yes." He took a breath. He said, "About a year and a half ago, I was going through some old paperwork. The county was sending me notices about taxes on this property. I had inherited the building, the deed, everything from your father's estate. He had named me as his executor years before, when you were a baby, before he had any reason to think he would need an executor anytime soon," he said.
There was paperwork I had never looked at properly, about a court case, about the railway, the investigation after his accident, a document that listed your mother's name, and below it, a line that said, "One surviving daughter, Eleanor Calloway, with your date of birth," he said. I had known about you, of course. He talked about you. He carried a picture of you in his wallet from the day you were born. He used to take it out at lunch, just to look at it. He told me, the week before he died, that he was going to bring you out here on your 6th birthday. He was going to show you the locomotive. He had been planning it for months. I had to put my head down between my knees. I had to breathe. Hollis waited. When I came back up, he kept going, he said, after he was gone. I tried to stay in your life. I went to your mother twice. The first time, you were 2 years old. The second time, you were 7. I wanted to talk to her about Wendell. I wanted to make sure she knew that he had been loved by people other than her, that she had not been the only one who lost him. He said, the first time she received me politely, we sat on her front porch and we drank iced tea. She did not invite me back, but she did not turn me away, he said. The second time, when you were 7, a man answered the door. He was tall, broad through the shoulders. He had a small, calm smile that did not reach his eyes. I closed my eyes. Hollis said, he told me there was nobody by that name living there. He said it 3 times, like a man who had been practicing the line. He told me to leave the property. He told me not to come back. He told me if I ever knocked on that door again, he would have me arrested for harassment, he said. I did not come back, he said. I should have. Eleanor, I should have come back. I should have figured out a way around him, a way to reach you. I should have written letters. I should have left them in the mailbox. I should have done something, anything, he said. I told myself for years that there was nothing I could do, that the law was on his side, that he had married your mother and I had no standing, he said. That was a coward's reason, he said. I am sorry. His voice cracked on the last word. He stopped. He looked out at the locomotive on the rails and the marsh going copper in the evening light. And he did not say anything for a long time. I said, he did the same thing to me. He turned his head toward me. I said, he erased me for 10 years. I said, he made me a ghost in his house. He knew exactly what he was doing. I said, you did not stand a chance, Hollis. He had practice on you. The old man's eyes filled up, just briefly, just for a moment, and then he turned his face slightly toward the locomotive so I could not see. I let him have that. We sat there for a long time without talking. Then I said, tell me about him. My father. Tell me about Wendell, he said. All right. He cleared his throat. He said, he had a habit. Before every run, he would put his hand flat on the side of the locomotive before he climbed up into the cab, like he was greeting a person. Just for a second, hand flat. Hold it there. Then up the steps, he said. The other crews used to give him a hard time about it. They would tease him. They would say he treated her like she was alive. He never argued back. He never explained himself. He just did it every single time, he said. One time, just once, a young brakeman pushed him on it, asked him why he did it, and your father said, anything that was built to carry people deserves to be treated with respect, he said. That was Wendell. He smiled, small, sad, real. Then he told me about the accident. He told me about a stretch of track out near the river, about 6 miles from here, that had been flagged for repair for almost 6 months. The railroad had postponed the repairs 3 times for budget reasons. Each time the budget request had been denied. Each time the supervisors had decided to keep running trains over the bad section. Just for 1 more quarter. Just 1 more. He told me there had been a heavy rain that November. 3 days of it. The ground had softened under the rails. The ballast had washed out in places. The supervisors had known. They had documents, engineering reports. They had known. Wendell had known too. Wendell had known and had still gone out on the run that night. Because there were people on that train who needed to be somewhere. Because there were always people on that train who needed to be somewhere. And because if he refused the run, some other engineer would take it, and if some other engineer took it, the other engineer would not have his hand on the controls when the moment came. Wendell's hand was the best hand on that line. He had said so himself, quietly, privately, to Hollis many times. Hollis said. He came around that curve. The rail gave. The whole front of the locomotive started to come off the bed. Hollis said, He hit the emergency brake before it fully went over. Locked everything. The locomotive was already past the point of saving, but the cars were not. He kept the cars on the track. He kept the cars on the bed. He saved every passenger on that train. He said, there were 38 people on that run. Eleanor, he said, he did not save himself. He said, there was no time. I sat with my hands in my lap and I let the tears come. I had not let myself cry for my father since I was 5 years old. There was no point. You can't cry for somebody you don't really remember. It feels like crying for a stranger. I had remembered him now. The smell of his hands. The way he closed his eyes when he heard the whistle. The promise of something special he was going to show me. He had been going to bring me here. Hollis put one big calloused hand on my back. Just briefly. Just for a moment. Then he took it away. We sat in silence as the sun finished going down. The next day, Hollis took me into the basement again, and we went through the rest of the metal box together. There were Wendell's logbooks, his handwriting small and even, slightly tilted to the right. Sketches of engine parts in the margins. A man's hand moving on its own while his mind was in another place. There were letters, some never sent. One addressed to my mother. I folded that one back into its envelope after the first 3 lines. I needed more time. I needed more strength. There was a small cloth mail bag with Hollis's old things in it. A worn leather wallet, a Union card from 1979, a small New Testament with Wendell's name written on the inside cover in handwriting that wasn't my father's. Hollis had written my father's name in that book. I asked him why. He said, he gave it to me when he got married. He said I needed it more than he did. He half laughed. He said, he was not wrong, and there was a notebook, a composition book, with a blue marbled cover, the kind they sell at every drugstore in America, with electrical tape reinforcing the spine. On the cover, in Wendell's small, even handwriting, one line, the station project. I opened it with shaking hands. 41 pages, sketches of the restored facade, hand-drawn floor plans, penciled budgets in dollars from 14 years ago, a list of contacts at the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, a list of contacts at the National Register of Historic Places, pages of notes about the history of the Coastal Carolina Railway, about the small towns it had connected, about the people it had carried, and at the back, 4 pages, written faster, less careful, written all at once. Wendell had written that the station was not just a building, it was the memory of a time when the small towns of the Low Country had been connected to one another and to the city, when a working man could feel proud of what he did, because what he did moved people and moved their stories.
He had written that the abandonment of the rail line was the abandonment of a promise. He had written that he intended to spend the next several years of his life working to restore the station, turning it into a living museum, a community gathering place, a building this county could recognize as part of its identity instead of pretending it didn't exist. The last line of those 4 pages said, "If I cannot finish this, may whoever finds this notebook finish it for me." I closed the notebook. I held it against my chest. I cried again, quieter this time, just steady, like rain on a tin roof. Hollis was in the doorway of the basement, halfway up the stairs, giving me space. I came up the stairs eventually. I sat on the floor of the station master's office. I said, "He was 28 years old." Hollis said, "Yes," I said. "He thought he had time." Hollis said, "Everybody at 28 thinks they have time." I said, "I am going to finish it." He looked at me. He said, "I know." The next 4 months moved in a blur. Lyman started on the south wall, brick by brick, slow as winter. He worked in near silence with the concentration of a surgeon. When a section came out particularly clean, he would step back 2 paces and look at it for a moment with quiet satisfaction, like a man finishing a sentence in a long letter. Josephine practically moved into the county library. She came back twice a week with photocopies and microfilm printouts, old newspaper articles about the Coastal Carolina Railway, about the towns it had connected, about the closing, about the accident. Hazel began coming on Tuesdays. She brought biscuit. She told me stories about my mother as a young woman, stories I had never heard. The way Adeline had laughed when she was 19. The boy from Charleston she had dated for 1 summer, who had broken her heart. The way she had met Wendell at a county fair when she was 22. He had been working a booth for the railway. She had been working a booth for the hospital. They had both been bored and tired by mid-afternoon, and they had ended up talking for 3 hours over a shared bag of boiled peanuts. Hazel told me these things, and I drank them in like a person who has been thirsty for 10 years. I asked her once why she had not come for me herself. After Mama died, she said, "Honey, I tried." She said, "I came to the funeral. I came up to you in the receiving line. I said your name. You did not look at me. Vernon was right next to you. He had his hand on the small of your back, and he steered you away from me, like he was steering a car," she said. I tried again. About a year later, I drove out to that house. He came to the door. He said you were not available. He said you were not available the next time either. The 3rd time he told me he would call the sheriff if I came back. She said, "I should have made more noise. I have thought about that. I have thought about that a lot," she said.
But I had Earl by then. He was sick. He had 3 more years. I had him to take care of. And I had your mother's box, which she had asked me to keep. She said, and I told myself that you would find your way back, eventually. Children of women like your mother always find their way back, eventually. She looked at me. She said, and here you are. I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I taught myself to write grant applications, studying examples I found online. I took a free course on cultural management on my phone at night by the light of a battery lantern. I wrote to preservation foundations, state arts councils, historical societies. Most did not write back. Some wrote back with rejections. One said they would consider the application. I kept writing. In the 5th month, I was working on the south outer wall, pulling decades of kudzu off the brick, when I heard a car on the access road. It was a black SUV, new, clean, out of place on a red dirt road. 2 men got out, both in casual business clothes. One of them carrying a clipboard. They said they represented Cravenswood Coastal Development. They said they had been monitoring real estate transactions in the county. They said they had identified this parcel as part of a possible acquisition. They said their legal team had concerns about whether the original sale was valid. They said they would be willing to discuss a settlement that would let me walk away with something, rather than nothing, at the end of a long legal process. I listened in silence. I felt the old familiar feeling, the childhood one, the one where someone with more apparent power was present, and I was supposed to become smaller. I was not that person anymore. I told them the deed was properly filed. I told them the title search had come up clean. I told them Hollis Brennan was a man in full possession of his mental faculties and of his property rights, and that any attorney who spent 5 minutes with him would confirm that immediately. I told them they were on private property. I asked them to leave. The man with the clipboard looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at the station building behind me, then at the locomotive on the tracks, and I could see him doing different math, square footage math, market value math. How many condominium units could be built on a parcel this size if the existing structure were not in the way? He handed me a business card. He said, "We hope you will reconsider." I held that card until his SUV was halfway back down the access road. Then I walked over to where Hollis was sitting on the platform. I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Your father would have handled it exactly the same way." He took a sip of his coffee. For him, the matter was closed. We went back to work. But I had a feeling in my chest, a small, cold one, that this was not the last time we were going to see Cravenswood Coastal Development. The storm came in late August, a tropical system that the Weather Service had said was going to track south of us, until at the last minute it didn't. It made a hard right and came up the coast. It made landfall 30 miles south of Wadebridge.
It came across the marshes in the dark. The wind was sustained at 60 miles an hour, with gusts close to 90.
We had nailed down what we could, tarped the roof sections that Lyman had been working on, moved the photographs and the notebook and the metal box up out of the basement to the second floor. I sat with Hazel and Hollis in the station master's office through the worst of it. The walls shook. The wind screamed
through the empty window frames in the rest of the building like a thing alive. Around 2 in the morning, we heard a heavy crack. In the morning, the south side of the roof was gone.
Not all of it. The section Lyman had just finished re-shingling, a 30-foot section, peeled back like the lid of a sardine can, lying in the marsh grass 200 feet from the building. Lyman came at dawn. He stood on the platform and looked at it. He did not say anything for a long time. He took his cap off and held it in both hands. Then he put it back on. He said, "We will start over." That afternoon, I checked my email at the library in town. The State Historic Preservation Division had sent a response to my National Register application. The application had been returned. They needed 3 additional documents that I did not have, that I did not know how to get, that were going to take months to assemble. That evening, I drove Hazel home. I came back to the station. The light was failing. I walked into the station master's office to put away the keys. Hollis was sitting in the chair by the desk. He was very still. His skin was the wrong color. I said his name. He looked up at me. He tried to say something. The words came out crooked. The right side of his mouth did not move with the left side of his mouth. I had my phone out before I knew I had reached for it. I called 911. I held his hand. I told the operator we were at the old Carolina Rose station, 1/4 mile down the dirt road off Highway 17. I told her to hurry. The ambulance came. They put him on a stretcher. They put the stretcher in the back. I rode with him to the hospital in Wadebridge. He was admitted at 9:17 in the evening on a Wednesday. Mild stroke, the doctors said. Mild. He was lucky. He was conscious. He was responsive. He was not coming back to work for a long time. Maybe ever. I drove back to the station alone at 2 in the morning. I sat in the empty waiting room. The roof was off the south side. The application was rejected. The old man who had built this whole thing for me was in a hospital bed 12 miles away, half his face not working. I sat on the heart pine floor in the dark, and for the first time since I had arrived at this station, I considered, just considered, for 1 hour, whether this was where I was supposed to stop. The wind moved through the empty windows. The marsh breathed, and I did not have an answer. Not yet. I sat on that floor until the sun came up. I did not sleep. I did not cry. I did not move much at all. I just sat, with my back against the wall by the ticket windows, and I watched the gray come slowly into the room through the empty window frames. By 6 in the morning, The air was full of mosquitoes. The marsh was waking up. A great blue heron flew past the open doorway with the slow, heavy wing beat of a creature that has never been in a hurry about anything. I watched it go. I thought about Hollis in the hospital bed. I thought about the south roof in the marsh grass. I thought about the rejected application sitting in my email. I thought about Vernon sitting on his front porch, drinking his coffee, knowing he always knew.
When you erase a person for 10 years, you become very good at watching them from the corner of your eye. He had his ways of finding out things. He had his church. He had his county tax assessor's office. He had his small, calm network of people who told him things about people who used to live in his house. He knew where I was. He had always known. He had just been waiting for the right moment. A storm, a stroke, a 19-year-old girl with no money and no roof and no protector. That was the moment Vernon Pickett had been waiting for. I knew it the way you know weather is coming, from the way the air feels. I got up off the floor. I went and washed my face at the iron pump. I made coffee on the camp stove. I did not know what I was going to do yet. I just knew I was not going to do nothing. Around 9, I walked up to the basement again. I went down the wooden stairs with the flashlight. Even though the morning was bright by then, the basement air was cool, steady. The kerosene lamp was where it always was. The metal box was where it always was. The notebook was beside it, the blue marbled cover dim in the half-light. I sat down at the roll-top desk. I opened the notebook. I went through it page by page, slowly, carefully, the way you go through the pockets of a coat that belonged to somebody you have lost. And then on page 34, I saw something I had missed. A name tucked into the margin of a list of contacts. In Wendell's small, even handwriting, 2 words and an address in Wadebridge, Hazel Marsh, and next to her name, in tiny letters, 3 more words, Keeper of Records. I sat there with the notebook open. Keeper of Records, she had told me, the first day she came, that she had something at her house that my mother had given her to keep 10 years ago, and she had told me eventually I would come for it. Not eventually, now. I drove out to Hazel's house at 10:30 in Hollis's old pickup truck. He had given me the keys 2 months earlier, and I had only ever used the truck to drive Lyman to the lumber yard. The seats smelled like Hollis, like canvas and coffee and pipe tobacco from 20 years ago. I had to push the seat all the way forward to reach the pedals. I drove. The low country rolled past me, the marsh on one side and the live oaks on the other, the road wet in places from the storm. Branches down in the ditches, power lines hanging low. Hazel lived in a small white wooden house at the end of a quiet street on the north side of Wadebridge. There were azaleas in the front yard, a screened porch, a wind chime made out of old keys hanging from a hook. I knocked. I heard her cane on the floor inside. Slow, steady. She opened the door. She saw my face, and her own face changed. She said, "Oh, honey." She did not ask me to come in. She just stepped aside. I walked in. The house smelled like lemon and old paper. There were photographs on every flat surface. Earl in his station master's uniform. A young Hazel in a wedding dress. Children. Grandchildren. A whole life. She sat me down at the kitchen table. She poured me coffee. She did not ask me what was wrong. She did not ask me anything. She just sat across from me. She waited. I said, "Hollis had a stroke last night." She closed her eyes for a second. She said, "Is he?" I said, "He is alive. He is in the hospital. He is going to live. But he is going to be a long time getting back. If he gets back." She said, "Lord." We sat for a moment. Then I said, "Hazel, I found your name in my father's notebook." He wrote, "Keeper of Records." She did not move. I said, "You told me the first day that my mother gave you something to keep for me." She said, "Yes." I said, "I am here." She looked at me for a long moment. She stood up. She walked into the back of the house. Slowly, with her cane. I heard a closet open. I heard her moving things. I heard a small, heavy thing being set on the floor. She came back. She was carrying a wooden box, small, about the size of a shoebox, but not the same box. This one was darker wood, walnut maybe, with a small lock on the front and a small key hanging from a piece of red yarn looped around the lock. She set it on the table between us. She said, "Your mother gave me this when she was 40. I was 62. She came to my house on a Sunday afternoon in 2016. She was about to marry Vernon Pickett. She had not told you yet. She wanted to tell you carefully. She knew it was a risk." She said, "She came to my house with this box." She said, "Hazel, I need you to keep this for me. I cannot keep it in the house once I am married to him. I cannot have him near it. I cannot have him touch any of these things." She said, "She told me, if anything ever happens to me, don't let him have this. Hold it until my daughter comes for it." She said, "Eleanor will find her way back to it eventually. She is her father's child, and she is my child. She will find her way." Hazel touched the lid of the box gently. She said, "I have kept it for 10 years. I have not opened it. I have not shown it to anyone. I have not even told Earl what was in it.
He died not knowing this was in the back closet of our own house. I gave your mother my word. She slid the key off the yarn. She held it out to me. She said, "It is yours now." I took the key with hands that did not feel like my own hands. I unlocked the box. I opened the lid. The first thing on top was a stack of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Maybe 20 letters. The handwriting on the envelopes was Wendell's, the same handwriting from the logbooks, the same handwriting from the notebook in the basement. The letters were addressed to Adeline Calloway, Mama, before she was married to my father, when she was still Adeline Hutchins, 22 years old, working at the county hospital. The letters were love letters. I did not read them all. Not then. Not in Hazel's kitchen. I would read them later, slowly, over weeks, the way you sip cold water on a hot day, a little at a time. But I read enough of the first one to understand. He had loved her completely. He had told her so, in careful sentences, in the kind of plain hand-to-paper words a young man uses when he does not yet know how to be impressive, and does not yet know that not being impressive is the most impressive thing a young man can be. I put the letters aside. There were photographs, more of them. Mama young, Mama with Wendell, Mama pregnant with me, Mama holding me as a baby, Wendell holding me. A photograph of the three of us on the platform of the station. I was about 2. He was holding me up so I could see the locomotive. My mother was laughing in the background. She had her hand on his shoulder. I had to stop. I had to put my hand on the table to steady myself. Hazel was watching me. She did not say anything. I went back to the box. Below the photographs, there was something else. A small bound book with a cloth cover, faded green. The kind of journal you can buy at a stationery store. I took it out. I opened it. It was Mama's handwriting, not the careful schoolteacher handwriting of my childhood. A faster, more uneven handwriting, the handwriting of a woman writing fast because she was tired, because her hand hurt, because she might not have time to write much more. The first entry was dated 3 months before she died. I have been told this morning that the cancer is in the bones. The doctor was kind. He used soft words. But the words still mean what they mean. I have a few months, maybe 6, maybe 4. Nobody can say. I am writing this for my daughter, Eleanor, because there are things I need her to know, things I have not been able to say. I sat in Hazel's kitchen and I read. I read the whole journal. I will not tell you everything she wrote. Some of it is mine. Some things a daughter gets to keep for herself. But I will tell you the heart of it. She wrote that when she was 22, 3 months before she met Wendell at the county fair. She had been walking out by the old Coastal Carolina railway station with a friend, a girlfriend. They had been bored. They had been killing a Sunday afternoon. They had wandered down the dirt road just to see what was at the end of it.
The station had been operating then. There had been people on the platform. There had been a train at the depot. Mama had stood there at the edge of the platform, and she had felt something. She had written it down. Years later, the exact words. I stood there, and I felt like I was looking at my own future. I did not know what the future was. I just knew the future had something to do with this place. 3 months later, she had met Wendell. 3 months after that, she had brought him out to the station for the first time, just to walk the platform with him, just to see what would happen. He had stood in the same spot she had stood in. He had looked out at the marsh. He had said, "This is the most beautiful place in the world." And she had known. She had written. She had known then that she was going to marry him, that they were going to make a life, that the life had something to do with this station. When the line was decommissioned in 2012, when Wendell was killed, the dream had ended, or so she had thought, until the last weeks of her life. She had written in one of the last entries, "I have been thinking about Wendell's notebook, the one he started before he died, the one where he was planning to restore the station. I have not been able to look at it in years. Vernon does not know it exists. I hid it. After Wendell died, I put it down in the basement of the station before they boarded it up. I asked Hollis to keep an eye on the place. I told him, someday, someone will need to find what is in that basement. Someday, I will bring my daughter back." She had written, "I am running out of days. I do not know if I will get to bring her there myself. I am so afraid that I will not. But I have done what I can. I have kept this box. I have kept the letters. I have kept the photographs. I have given them to Hazel. Hazel will hold them. I am going to tell my daughter the whole story on her 17th birthday. I have decided 3 months from now, I will sit her down at the kitchen table when Vernon is out of the house, and I will tell her about her father, and I will tell her about the station, and I will give her the key to this box, and I will take her there myself. I have decided. I will not let Vernon's silence be her inheritance." She had written that on a Tuesday. She died 11 days later. The next entry was the last entry. It was dated 3 days before she died. The handwriting was almost unreadable. She had written, "I am not going to make it to her birthday. I know that now. If you are reading this, Eleanor, it is because you have found your way back, the way I always knew you would.
I am sorry I did not get to take you myself. I am not gone. I am in this box. I am in those letters. I am in the station. I am in the man who loved you before you were born. Find him. Find him. He is waiting in the basement. He is waiting for you. I love you. I have always loved you. I am sorry. I am sorry for the silence. I am sorry I did not protect you. I am with you, Mama. I closed the journal. I sat in Hazel's kitchen. I cried the way I had not cried in 14 years. Not for the loss of one parent, for the loss of two, and for the slow, extraordinary discovery that neither of them had ever actually let go of me. Hazel got up. She came around the table. She put her arms around me from the side. She held me. She did not shush me. She did not say it was going to be all right. She just held me for a long time. When I could speak, I asked her why she had not given me the box the first day she came to the station. She said, "Because your mother told me to wait until you came for it," she said. "Your mother said, Eleanor needs to choose this, not be handed it. The way Wendell said about everything important." She said, "Honey, some things have to be found, not given." I had heard those words before, from Hollis. It was the same sentence. They had both been saying it for years. Hollis on his side, Hazel on hers. Two old people in two different houses, holding two different sets of pieces, waiting for me to be ready to come and find each of them. I drove back to the station with the box on the seat beside me. I drove past Vernon's house on the way. I had to. The street was the only way out of Hazel's neighborhood toward the highway. He was on the front porch. He saw me drive past in Hollis's truck. He stood up. I kept driving. I did not look at him in the rearview mirror. I did not need to. I knew what was coming. He came out to the station the next afternoon. I was on the platform with Lyman. We were starting to clear away the section of roof that had ended up in the marsh grass. We were going to have to pull it out piece by piece, carry it back, salvage what could be salvaged, throw away the rest. I heard the car on the access road. It was not an SUV. It was Vernon's Buick. He pulled up at the gate. He got out. He stood there for a moment, looking at the building, like he was sizing it up, like he was already deciding what it was worth on the open market. Then he walked up the platform steps, slowly, calmly, the way he walked everywhere. Lyman straightened up. Lyman was 60 years old and a foot taller than Vernon. Lyman did not say anything. He just stopped working, and he watched. Vernon came up onto the platform. He looked at Lyman. He looked at me.
He said, "Eleanor," I said, "you are on private property." He said, "We need to talk. Inside, just you and me." I said, "Whatever you came to say, you can say out here." He looked at Lyman. He said, "I would prefer privacy."
Lyman did not move.
Lyman said, "Miss Eleanor, do you want me to leave?" I said, "No."
Lyman, I do not.
Lyman said, "All right then."
He went back to working on the roof debris, slowly, methodically, within earshot. Vernon's mouth tightened. He turned back to me. He said,
"I am here as a courtesy to inform you that I have retained an attorney regarding the disposition of your mother's estate." I said, "My mother had no estate. She had a few personal items, which I have. Everything else was already in your name by the time she died."
He said,
"That is not entirely correct. There is the matter of the marital property she brought into the marriage, her savings, her share of the household, and there is the matter of property acquired by her surviving heir, using funds that were earned, while that heir was a minor in my home and legally my dependent."
He looked at the station behind me.
He said, "My attorney believes there is a strong case that this property was acquired with funds that constitute marital community property, of which I am the surviving spouse." He said, "We can do this in court, or we can come to an arrangement."
I stared at him. I had been waiting for this. I had not known the exact shape of it, but I had been waiting for it. I said,
"Vernon?"
He said,
"Yes," I said.
"You did not feed me from the day my mother died until the day I left.
You did not give me $1.
He said.
"That is irrelevant."
I said, "You closed the heat vent in my bedroom. You turned the heat off in my room. For 2 winters, I slept in 2 sweaters and a wool hat." He said, "I do not have to listen to revisionist." I said, "You introduced me to every person who came through your front door as the daughter of your late wife. You never said my name. You never let any of them say my name." He said, "Eleanor," I said, "you blocked Hollis Brennan from seeing me when I was 7 years old. You stood in your front doorway and you told a man who loved my father like a brother that nobody by my name lived at that address. He went very still. He said, 'I do not know what you are.'" I said, "He told me. Vernon, Hollis told me 3 months ago. He told me about both visits. He told me about the iced tea on the porch with my mother. He told me about your face, the day you told him I did not exist. He said, 'I think you have been listening to.' I said, 'Hazel Marsh told me about her 3 attempts, about the funeral, about you steering me away, about the time you threatened to call the sheriff.' He said,
She is a senile old woman, I said. She is 82 years old, and her mind is sharper than yours has ever been, he said. Eleanor, you are going to lose this property in court if you do not agree to negotiate now, I said. Vernon, look at me. He looked at me. I said, you spent 10 years erasing me from your house. You made me a ghost. You decided I was nothing. You did it on purpose. With a small, calm smile, I said, you were good at it. I will give you that. You were the best at it I have ever seen, I said. But here is what you did not know. You did not know that I had a father who loved me before you. You did not know that I had a mother who loved me after you. You did not know that there were people in this county who had been waiting patiently for me to find my way home to them, I said. You spent 10 years building a wall around me, and you did not realize that on the other side of that wall, people were building a door, I said. Get off my property. He did not move, I said. Get off my property, or Lyman is going to walk you off it. Lyman set down his pry bar. He took 2 steps forward. He did not say anything. Vernon looked at Lyman. Vernon looked at me. He said, this is not over, I said. Yes, it is. He turned. He walked off the platform. He got in his Buick. He drove down the dirt road. I stood on the platform with my hands shaking. Lyman picked his pry bar back up. He said, Miss Eleanor, I said. Yes, he said. That was a long time coming, I said. Yes, it was. He went back to work. The lawsuit came 8 days later. It was a joint filing. Vernon Pickett as petitioner. Cravenswood Coastal Development named as a party of interest. They had bought him. Cravenswood had purchased his potential interest in the property for $35,000, cash. They had filed the suit on his behalf. They were paying his legal fees. The 2 villains had become one villain. I read the papers in the kitchen of the station master's office. I read them twice. I made coffee. I read them a 3rd time. Then I called the South Carolina Low Country Legal Aid Office. A woman named Ms. Nan Thurmond returned my call within the hour. She was a retired judge. She had been doing pro bono work for 15 years. She heard me out for 40 minutes without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, Eleanor, listen to me carefully, she said. They are bluffing, she said. There is no marital community property claim in South Carolina that holds water against a properly recorded deed. The funds you used to purchase the property were earned by you as an adult after your 18th birthday, after the death of your mother. There is no scenario under which any court grants Vernon Pickett a percentage of this station. She said, they know this. She said, They are not trying to win. They are trying to make you settle, she said. They are betting that you are 19 and alone and cannot afford to fight. I said, I am 19 and I am not alone and I cannot afford to fight, but I am going to fight anyway, she said. Honey, you don't have to. I will fight for you, for free, and I am going to win, I said. Why? She said. Because I have known about Vernon Pickett for 30 years, and I have been waiting for somebody to give me a reason to take him on in court. I drove to the hospital that afternoon. Hollis was sitting up in bed for the first time. The right side of his face was working better. His speech was coming back, slowly, word by word. I told him about Vernon, about Cravenswood, about Nan Thurmond. He listened when I finished. He said one word, good. It came out clear. I cried a little. He patted my hand with his good hand 3 times, the way you pat a child on the head when they have finished a hard thing. I went back to the station. I went down into the basement. I opened the metal box. I took out my father's notebook, the one with the blue marbled cover. I took it upstairs. I sat on the platform and I started to make a list, not of legal arguments. Nan was handling those. I made a list of everything we needed to finish: the roof, the application, the opening. 3 things. I wrote them down in clean handwriting on a fresh page of a notebook I had bought at the gas station for $1. I drew a line under them. I started to work. The first thing was the roof. I called Lyman. I told him we were going to need to start on the south section over again, from scratch. He said he had already figured that. He said he had 3 young men from his church who wanted to help. He said they were strong and they had nothing better to do for the next 4 weekends. By the 3rd weekend, the roof was back on. The second thing was the application. I called Josephine. I told her about the rejection. I told her what they needed. 3 documents. Detailed photographic survey of the original architectural elements. Letter of significance from a state-certified historian. Local letters of support, Josephine said. Eleanor, honey, I can do all 3 of those things by myself in about 3 weeks. I have been waiting my whole retirement for somebody to ask me to do something like this. She did it in 2 weeks and 4 days. The application went back to the state on a Friday. The third thing was the opening. I had been planning a small opening, just family and friends, just the people who had helped. I changed my mind. I called the county weekly newspaper. I told them I had a story. They sent a reporter and a photographer out to the station. The reporter was a woman named Miss Polly Edisto. She was 40. She had grown up in Wadebridge. Her grandfather had ridden the Coastal Carolina line as a boy. She spent 4 hours with me. She walked the whole property. She looked at the photographs. She read parts of my father's notebook.
She read parts of my mother's journal. She wrote a story. The story ran on the front page of the next Sunday's edition. Then the larger papers picked it up. The Charleston Post, the Beaufort Gazette. The story went on the wire. By Wednesday, it had been picked up by a regional public radio station. By Friday, it had been picked up by a national preservation magazine. By the second week, Cravenswood Coastal Development released a statement saying they were withdrawing from the litigation to focus on their core business priorities. By the third week, the State Historic Preservation Division approved the National Register application. Their letter said the supporting documentation was among the most thorough they had ever received. By the fourth week, Vernon Pickett's attorney withdrew from the case, citing a fee dispute. Vernon represented himself for 2 more weeks. Then he too withdrew. Nan Thurmond called me with the news. On a Tuesday afternoon, she said, "He's done. Eleanor, he is done. The papers are signed, filed. He waived all future claims, in writing, with his signature, in open court," she said. "He is not coming back." I sat in the station master's office. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel relief. I felt something quieter than that. I felt my father's promise. I felt my mother's hand lifting from my shoulders. The opening was a Saturday in October. The Low Country that Saturday was the kind of October that does not happen often. The light came in low and gold across the marshes. The air was cool for the first time in months. The Spanish moss on the live oaks moved slowly in a small, steady breeze. The roof was on. The brick was clean. Lyman's work, section by section, slow as winter, beautiful. The platform was painted. The iron archways had been treated and stabilized. The original ticket windows had been restored. The pressed tin ceiling cleaned and patched. The heart pine floors waxed. The locomotive Carolina Rose still sat on the rails. We had not restored her to running condition. That was a project for another year, or another decade, or another generation. But we had stabilized her. We had cleared the trumpet vine and the resurrection fern. We had treated the metal. We had repainted the lettering along her side. The cedar tree growing between the second and third passenger cars. We had left. It seemed right, Lyman had said. That tree has been holding those cars together for 14 years. I will not be the one to take it down. People came. People came from all over the county, from the next county, from the city. People I had never met. People who had ridden this line as children. People whose grandfathers had worked on it. People whose mothers had taken trains north out of this station to follow husbands and dreams and possibilities. Hazel was there, in a navy blue dress, sitting on the restored bench on the platform, holding court. Lyman was there, with his church, with his 3 young men who had put the roof back on, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Josephine was there, wearing reading glasses on a beaded chain, pointing things out to a small flock of people who had become her unofficial historical society. Hollis was there. He had come out of rehabilitation 2 weeks before. He was walking with a cane. The right side of his face still moved a half-second behind the left. But he was here, in a clean, white, short-sleeved shirt, with his canvas hat in his lap, sitting on the same bench he always sat on, at the edge of the platform, looking out at the locomotive. I cut a ribbon. Some local dignitaries said some words. The radio reporter recorded an interview when the ceremony was over, and the crowds began to drift through the building to look at the photographs, to look at the restored ticket windows, to look at the model of the line that Josephine had built in the south room. A woman came up to me. She was about 70. She walked with the careful, deliberate step of a woman who has known this body for a long time. She had a pearl necklace. Her hair was gray and short. She said, "Miss Calloway." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "My name is Miss Beulah Tisdale. I am sorry to take a moment of your time today." I said, "Take all the time you want." She said, "I sold tickets at this station from 1974 to 1979. I was 19 years old when I started. I was 24 when I left." She said, "I just wanted to tell you that I have been thinking about this place for 47 years. She said, "I never thought I would see it again." She said, "I had a window right over there, the one on the left of the pair. I used to sell tickets out of that window to anybody who came to that window for 5 years." She said, "I knew everybody in 3 counties by their first names because they all came to my window. Eventually," she said, "when the line closed, I cried for a week. I am not embarrassed to tell you. I cried for a week," she said. "I am 70 years old, honey, and I came here today, and I walked up to that window, and I put my hand on the iron grill, and I thanked God that somebody had finally come along and turned the lights back on in this place. I did not know what to say. I just took her hand and held it for a long moment." She said, "I taught school for 40 years. After, I always told my students that the most important things they could do were the things nobody noticed, the small daily things, the things that connect one person to another." She said, "This place was that for 5 years for me." She said, "Thank you for giving it back." She walked away slowly. I stood on the platform with the gold light slanting across the marsh. I thought about my mother standing at this same edge at 22, looking at her future, and I thought, she was right. That night, after everyone had gone, after the catered food was cleaned up, after the volunteers had gone home, after Hazel was driven home by her grandson, after Hollis was walked to his truck by Lyman, I locked the doors of the station. I was alone. The marsh was loud with frogs and night birds. The locomotive was just a dark shape against the deeper dark of the trees. I climbed up into the cab of the Carolina Rose.
The steps had been reinforced during the restoration. The cabin floor was solid under my boots. The original brass instruments were still there. The pressure gauge, the throttle, the reverser, the brake valve. They had been polished by Lyman over the course of 3 days. They caught what little light was left. I stood in the cab. I thought about my father, his hand on the throttle, his ear on the engine, the way he had closed his eyes at the sound of the whistle. I put my palm flat against the boiler, the way Hollis had told me Wendell always did. I held it there, and in the marsh behind the station, far off, almost too far to be sure, so far that I held my breath to be certain. I heard a train whistle, long, low, mournful, coming across the marshes from somewhere down a line that had not carried trains in 14 years. This time I did not run out onto the platform. This time I just closed my eyes. I knew what it was now. It was him. And it was her. It was both of them, saying, "We see you," saying, "We have always been with you," saying, "We were always going to find a way back." I climbed down from the cab. I sat down on the edge of the platform. The cool of the evening was settling into the marsh. The frogs were hitting their rhythm. A nighthawk called from somewhere out toward the river. I sat there until the moon came up over the live oaks, silver and patient. I was 19 years old. I was a girl who had been erased for 10 years by a man who thought silence could end her. I was the daughter of a man who had loved a locomotive like she was a person, because anything built to carry people deserves to be treated with respect. I was the daughter of a woman who had stood at the edge of a platform at 22 and felt her future. I was the inheritor of a notebook in a basement. I was the keeper of a station in a marsh. I was Eleanor Calloway, and I was finally home. The Carolina Rose Station opens to the public 5 days a week now. There is a small museum in the main waiting room. There is a community space in the old freight depot. On Friday evenings, a local jazz quartet plays in the first-class waiting room. People drink coffee and look out the restored arched windows at the locomotive on the rails. Hollis is the most requested guide on the property. He works there 4 days a week, at 78. He explains how a steam locomotive's firebox works to groups of school children with infinite patience and eyes that have a brightness in them now that I never saw on the day I met him. Lyman is now the project foreman for a partial restoration of the locomotive. We started raising money for it last spring. We are halfway there. Josephine wrote a book. Hazel comes for lunch on Tuesdays. Vernon Pickett moved out of the house in Wadebridge last year. I do not know where he went. I do not need to know. I am 21 years old. I am studying historic preservation at a state university. Part online, part on campus, on a full scholarship from a national foundation. I live in a small apartment that is mine. I pay for it with the income from the station. Some nights, after we close, I sit on the platform in Hollis's spot and I look at the Carolina Rose and I think about how the whole world had walked past a flyer on a telephone pole for a month, about how $40 was not the price of a building. It was the price of choosing, about how every life has a basement somewhere with a metal box on a desk, waiting to be opened. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you have lost, or someone you are still trying to find, or someone who tried to erase you and could not, then I want to tell you what my mother told me from the last page of her journal. You are not gone as long as somebody, anywhere, is willing to come back and find you. That is what we are here for. The ones we love are waiting in the basement. Go down the stairs, open the box,